Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamla, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Harachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, who rule well, as well as teach well. And peace and salutation to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And the title of this video is going to be Prophecy is no longer tarrying, it's speaking. Okay? Because that's, where we're at right now in these outer days. All right, in 2025, midway in June 2025, all right, it's June, okay, and that's what's happening all across Babylon and Great America, especially over this past week, okay, and as well overall throughout the four corners of the earth. The prophecies of Yahweh Bashim Shai are no longer tarrying, but now they're speaking and they're coming to pass. As the scripture speaks about, the words and the prophecies of Yahweh Bashim Shai are faithful and true. You see, and as the Lord told the prophet Habakkuk, right here in Habakkuk chapter 2, in verse 3, it says, "For the vision," okay, the vision going into what? The prophecies, "is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie." Okay, because what? They'll be found faithful as well as what? True. Okay, it says, "Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come to pass. It will surely come. It will not tarry." You see, and that's where we're at right now. These prophecies, these visions, all right, that the Lord has given to His elect, especially here in these outer days via the Holy Spirit, the Rachakwadash. Okay, they tarried for particular time. Okay, for the elect to wake up in their respective times. Okay, and be sealed. All right, and now is at a point. All right, when now these prophecies, these visions, are no longer tarrying. Okay, now they're surely coming to pass. All right, as we see, uproars of the people on a rise again. These different protests and riots happening throughout Los Angeles and different parts of Babylon the Great. Okay, we see war popping off between Israel and Iran. Okay, and even, all right, let's go to the Newsbreak app. All right, this is the Newsbreak app right here. You could just look at some of the titles of some of these recent articles that I've been going through, this past week. Okay, as you can see at the top right here, Florida sheriff warns rioters ahead of immigration protests. All right, let's look into that real quick. Okay, Florida sheriff warns rioters ahead of immigration protests. "We're not California. We will delete you." Okay, and this is his words. "We will delete you and tell your family where to collect your remains." Okay, speaking as a dragon, but pretty much. All right, because as of tomorrow, Saturday, June 14th, you're gonna have protests nationwide across Babylon the Great, known as the No Kings protest. More people across Babylon the Great are going to be gathering in these organized protests, which is ultimately all set up and orchestrated, okay, and funded. All of these protests and riots and things like that. But tomorrow you're going to have nationwide protests all throughout Babylon the Great America. Protesting against the ICE raids and the immigration policies put in place by Trump. Okay, and as well, tomorrow, Saturday, June 14th, is also Trump's birthday. Okay, and overall, it's been a highly anticipated day all throughout this week, because looking at what's been going on out there in Los Angeles over the past week. Okay, riots and looting and things like that. To where Trump ordered the National Guard to be sent down there in LA, along with hundreds of Marines. Okay, leading up to it tomorrow, we very well may see a lot of chaos happening throughout the cities across Babylon and Great America tomorrow. Okay, certain little skirmishes here and there, civil unrest, riots, looting, all these things. And that's this particular Florida sheriff who's been going viral this past week. He pretty much gave a strong message to any rioters, okay, ahead of the protest, nationwide protests that's coming out, that's going to be going on tomorrow. As he said, he said, "We're not California. We will delete you and tell your family where to collect your remains." Okay, and this is and of course this is all orchestrated. Okay, because over the past 4 years, the Democrats, under the Biden presidency, has allowed these different migrants to come into the country, flood the country. Okay, wiggle around, and it's been a lot of things happening since a lot of these migrants have been coming into the country. Okay, a lot of crime and things like that. And so now you have the right, okay, the Republicans, they're now coming with the so-called order, okay, to subdue the chaos, a lot of the chaos at the left, the Democrats have been allowing over the past 4 years. Okay, and as we see, one of the main ways that the right, the Republicans and whatnot, are going to look to subdue a lot of the chaos that the Democrats have allowed over these past 4 years, is just straight up offing people, okay, draconian measures. All right, and that speaks to Revelation the 13th chapter, verse 11 on down. We always go into it. Talks about the two horns like a lamb. The Democrat and Republican Party, present themselves as harmless and peaceful, and all about the best interests of the people and things like that, making all these broken promises. Okay, but it's all going to lead to both parties, all right, both sides, in agreement to speak as a dragon, draconian measures. Okay, to pretty much orchestrate a lot of these chaotic events and riots and things like that across the country. Okay, to justify shutting things down, shutting down the cities. Okay, taking away people's rights, constitutional rights. All right, and bringing forth martial law and digital ID system. Okay, AI. And it's all going to lead to the MOTB. Okay, and it's all going to be presented as peace and safety. You see, and then as you see, some of these other articles. Okay, Iran launches barrage of missiles at Israel following the attack. Okay, because I believe as of last night, okay, Israel officially launched an attack against Iran, against particular nuclear facilities over there in Iran, and even assassinating particular leaders of Iran's military. Some of their nuclear scientists and whatnot. High-ranking military officials. Okay, and in retaliation, all right, earlier today, Iran, okay, fired off. All right, let's go into it a little bit. It said, the source of this article is from CNN. It says, Iran launches barrage of missiles at Israel following attack. Okay, it says Tehran launched retaliatory strikes against locations across Israel on Friday. When you go further into it, one of the locations that Iran targeted, with these missiles was Tel Aviv. Okay, Tel Aviv, which when you go into the city of Tel Aviv, that's also the city that hosts the largest alphabet parade each year, across the world. You see, Tel Aviv, Israel. Okay, and it says following Israel's attacks on Iranian military and nuclear targets, it says Iran said Friday which is today, so-called Friday the 13th, right? It says Iran said Friday evening local time that it had fired hundreds of various ballistic missiles towards Israel in what it called the beginning of its crushing response. See that? The beginning of sorrows, the beginning of wars, the beginning of woes. Okay? So now, Israel and Iran is going at it. Okay? And then, it goes into more articles. It says, as you see right here, the third article, ICE is using a tracking app to identify people who can easily be deported, then arrest them. All right. So they, Esau's, tapping into a pseudoscience technology, in particular apps, to, track, okay, track those that are, considered, legal citizens, okay, for the purpose of, arresting them and then ultimately deporting them. And we all know what that's going to lead to, okay. Esau Edom, using, ramping up his mass surveillance through AI and technology and, technocracy to ultimately, come after natural born American citizens, okay, who's not going to conform to this NWO system, who's not going to bow the knee or take the charagma, okay, to justify, persecuting, arresting them, and then either what, offing them or deporting them, which, Trump is tapping into that, looking into deporting natural born U.S. citizens to prisons outside of the country, Alcatraz Island, Guantanamo Bay, El Salvador, okay, and then it goes into a little bit more articles. It says right here, the fourth one, Hegseth, okay, which is Pete Hegseth, which I believe he's the over the Secretary of Defense, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Okay, yeah, he's over the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, which I believe he's also a former soldier as well. But as the title of the article says, Hegseth tells Congress his quote-unquote war fighters, because that's the new term that they're labeling American soldiers now. They're no longer being labeled soldiers, but this particular guy, he's labeling them as war fighters. He says are primed for lethality, okay, are primed for lethality, as he sends them to face American protesters, okay, and this is all ahead of, again, the nationwide protests, okay, starting tomorrow, known as the No Kings protests, all across the nation. These different cities across Babylon and Great America, okay, under the vibration of Trump, are pretty much going to be ramping up their military presence, their National Guard presence, their police presence, okay, to combat some of these protests is going to be happening across the country, okay, looking at what's been going on in Los Angeles over this past week, all right. And so again, more of speaking as a dragon, you see. And then this article right here, okay, the source of this article is from Irish Star. It says more U.S. troops deployed to crush Los Angeles protests than are stationed in Iraq and Syria. Okay, so right now there's more U.S. troops that's been deployed to Los Angeles over this past week than there are U.S. troops stationed in Iraq and Syria. Okay, and mind you, Iraq and Syria over the past 10 years, 20 plus years have been pretty much war zones. Okay, so the fact that we see more U.S. troops, okay, U.S. Marines included, as this article goes into, over 2,000 National Guard troops plus 700 Marines, okay. What does that ultimately entail? That, Donald Trump and his government look at what's going on in Los Angeles as, a war, Okay, a war zone. Okay, and we all know how Esau reacts to things that he declared as war or acts of war. He comes down with the sword and he deletes people. Okay, so wait, looking at these protests that we've been seeing over these past week, especially leading up to tomorrow, hey, we may very well see, okay, many people getting off, okay, soon to come, following these protests. Edom is getting ready to come down with the sword, all right, and speak as a dragon, all right. Then it even says right here in this article, the source of this article is from the Huffington Post. It says Trump says he's done playing by the rules with military forces. Yeah, because the elites, want Trump to come down with the sword, speak as a dragon, okay, to go forward with their NWO agenda, to bring forth their left hand order out of all the chaos that they've orchestrated, okay, because all of this, all in all, is all being orchestrated by the elites. They set up the problem, okay, and then they sit back and watch the reaction of the people, okay, crying out for justice and order and things like that. And then once they get the reaction that they want from the people, then that justifies the elites also as well coming down with their left hand order, okay, to so-called deal with the problem that they've created, okay, and we very well see that they're going to use this Trump administration to deal with the problems that the elites have orchestrated under the Biden administration over these past 4 years. With the whole migrant situation and all the crime that's been going on over these past recent years, okay, and all the division and back and forth that's been going on in this country, okay. Problem, reaction, solution, okay. And Esau is not going to be playing by the rules because he's going to be playing by his own rules, okay. The sword, draconian measures, okay, coming down with this NWO agenda, okay, and it's all going to lead to the Quran, you see. But all in all, this all entails that, again, prophecy is no longer tarrying, but it's speaking, okay. Let's go to let's get Second Ezra, the 9th chapter, and let's start from the top. It says, he answered me then and said, measure thou the time diligently in itself, and when thou seest part of the signs pass, which I have told thee before, then shalt thou understand that it is the very same time wherein the highest will begin to visit the world which he made. You see, in all these judgments that's taking place around, Babylon the Great and around the world, okay, these are all signs letting us know that we're at the end and that Yahweh Shema Shah is visiting this wicked world in a form of all these judgments taking place. And there's going to be even more judgments taking place, okay. It says, verse 3, therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes and uproars of the people in the world, and we see earthquakes happening, earthquakes in diverse places, different, weather effects and, floodings happening, volcanic eruptions, and as well, we also see uproars of the people as well, especially over these past 4 years, from the George Floyd protests, Breonna Taylor and all of that, to to what we've been seeing across the country this past week. These anti-ICE, anti-immigration protests and riots and things like that. Okay, and then as well, what we're getting ready to see tomorrow throughout, Babylon the Great, the No Kings protests across the nations. All right, these are all uproars of the people, and these are all things that will be associated with, end times. The end of Esau's rulership, the end of this beast system that he rules over. America, NATO, and the EU. And these are all signs letting us, the hopeful elect, know that, Yahweh Shema Shai has visited this earth, okay, via the Holy Spirit in the form of these judgments and these prophecies coming to pass. It says, Verse 3 again. Therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes and uproars of the people in the world, then shalt thou well understand that the Most High spake of those things from the days that were before thee, even from the beginning. And how did the Most High Yahweh Shemashai speak of these things before these things would come to pass? Through the mouth of his prophets, his holy prophets, okay, which he has possessed from the beginning, as it speaks of in Sirach the 36th chapter. Okay, and this is verse 5, 2 Ezra 9, verse 5. For like as all that is made in the world hath a beginning and an end, and the end is manifest. Okay, the end is manifest. The word manifest, when you go into it, it basically means to make something clear. To make it clear, make it understandable, to make it plain upon tables, right? And all these things that we see going on around the world and here in Babylon the Great, okay, lets us, the hopeful elect, know that the end is indeed manifest, that these prophecies are speaking, okay? And then, also as well, another major thing that's been happening over the past couple of days or whatnot is, war popping off between Israel and Iran, okay? Where, last night or yesterday, Israel launched an attack against Iran, against, their nuclear facilities, taking out particular of their leaders and particular scientists and nuclear scientists and whatnot, okay? And then, earlier today, Iran launched an attack in retaliation, okay, launching, hundreds of missiles, as this article went into, okay, in response to, the attacks by Israel, all right? And we can even go into prophecy to read about that in 2nd Ezra, all right? 2nd Ezra, the 15th chapter. As a matter of fact, let me go to verse 14. 2nd Ezra 15, verse 14 says, Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. Okay, civil unrest, civil division, civil war. You see? And hey, we've been seeing, we've been seeing, just a dropping of that over this past week. The riots out there in LA, and particular skirmishes across, certain cities across America this past week. Okay, and hey, we may see more of this, come tomorrow. It says, verse 16, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Which speaks of what? Ultimately, the people rising up against their leaders, their government, okay, their presidents, their mayors, their counselors, judges, sedition, rebelling against the legitimate government, okay, and that's the spirit that's gonna be throughout the Babylon the Great, okay, come tomorrow. Again, the no kings protest is gonna be happening across the country, okay, to basically be in defiance against Trump and protesting against ICE and the immigration policies and the deportations and things like that. Okay, the spirit that's gonna be across Babylon the Great tomorrow is gonna be okay. All tied to this very verse right here, 2nd Ezra 15, verse 16. There should be sedition among men and invading one another. They should not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Okay, and eventually, before it's all said and done, okay, it's going to be true sedition and true rebellion, okay, in the near future, where even a lot of these these Edomites and these Trump supporters, these MAGA hats, are going to be really and truly taking up the sword and rebelling against their this government. Okay, when all their rights are going to be taken away from them, when they're going to realize that this whole Trump administration wasn't really put in office, to make America great again and make, Edomite supremacy great in America again, but instead, what? To take away their rights and usher in the NWO and the Charagma. Okay, you best believe when these Edomites finally realize that, okay, that that's when this prophecy is really going to pop off. Okay, and Esau's going to, take up the sword even against his own government. Okay, and of course their actions, as I said, is going to stand in their power. Okay, but I want to jump down, all right, in the chapter touching on the whole Israel and Iran situation. Okay, this is down in verse 28. 2nd Ezra 15 verse 28. It says, "Behold, an horrible vision in the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots." Okay, and who are the so-called Arabs? All right, those are the Ishmaelites. Okay, Ishmael. All right, the technical firstborn son of Abraham. Okay, whom the promises was not passed down to, because the promises was passed down to Isaac. But the so-called Arabs, those are Ishmaelites, the seed of Ishmael. It says, verse 29 again, "Where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon earth, and all they which hear them may fear and tremble." Okay, which ultimately speaks to what? Particular, Islamic nations throughout the Middle East, rising up, rising up against the West, rising up against NATO, rising up against the state of Israel. All right. And it says, verse 30, "Also the Carmanians raging in wrath shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come and join battle with them, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians." Okay, which the modern day, Assyrians is America. That's another code name for America in Bible prophecy. The spiritual Assyria, as well as spiritual Babylon, Babylon the Great. Okay, and also spiritual Egypt and spiritual Sodom. Okay, those are all code names for America throughout the Bible. Okay, but as it said in verse 30 again, "Also the Carmanians raging in wrath shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood." Now, I went to Google, and I just simply typed in Carmanians on Google, and this is the AI overview response. It says, "Carmanians were an ancient people associated with the region of Carmania, located in present-day Kerman province in Iran." You see that? Located in present-day Kerman province in Iran. Okay? They were known as a warlike people who were described as resembling the Medians and Persians in manner and customs. Carmania itself was a fertile region on the northern shore of the Persian Gulf. Okay? So, and it goes a little bit more into it. Matter of fact, let's read right here. It says right here, okay, reference in 2nd Ezra, which we just read. It says the Carmanians are mentioned in the book of 2nd Ezra, all right, 15 verse 30, as we just read, where they are depicted as being part of a larger apocalyptic narrative. And hey, when you deal with the word apocalyptic, that deals with the end time events. Okay, it says so basically the Carmanians, as we just read, the Carmanians would be stirred up, okay, in the end times, apocalyptic narrative according to Bible prophecy. And as we just saw, the Carmanians are basically Iran, the people of Iran, the military of Iran. Okay, so it goes into right here under description. It says In the book, they are described as a fierce and warlike people associated with the quote unquote dragons of Arabia. Okay, Ishmael and the different Islamic nations across the so-called Middle East. All right, but basically, the Carmanians is basically Iran, the Iranians. The Iranian military. And so, as it says again, 2nd Ezra 15, verse 30, also the Carmanians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood. Basically, meaning what? That in the end times, the Lord will stir up, okay, the Iran, the military of Iran. And we clearly been seeing that over the past, down there 10, 15 years, where Iran's been building up their military, their nuclear weaponry, their nuclear arsenal, okay, in defiance of all the sanctions that the U.S. has been imposing over them over the past 10, 15 years or so, okay, and not to mention, Iran has also been, linking up with Russia, okay, which that's a part of prophecy, Ezekiel 38, all right, and it continues to say, 2nd Ezra 15, verse 30 again, also the Carmanians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come and join battle with them, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians. Yeah, because Iran, with their nuclear arsenal, is going to be one of the major countries that's going to take part in the nuclear destruction of Babylon the Great. You see? And it says, verse 31, and then shall the dragons have the upper hand. Saudi Arabia, Ishmael, in particular other Islamic nations in the Middle East, okay, they shall have the upper hand. And why is that? Because, for one, the Lord is going to be dealing with them to wage war against the West, and to wage war against Israel. All right. And another reason that, these Islamic nations are going to have the upper hand is because Russia is going to be backing a lot of them up. Okay. Russia, China, all right, North Korea. Because what? If you've been keeping up with the news over the past couple years or so, countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia and different other, Islamic nations in the Middle East have been joining with the BRICS nations. Okay. And it says, and then shall the dragons have the upper hand, remembering their nature. Okay, remembering their nature. Because what does the scripture say about Ishmael when you read in Genesis 16? Then Ishmael will be a wild man. You see? And Ishmael, Ishmael, the so-called Arabs, and many of these other, Islamic nations, they're gonna go back to that nature. Okay, when as the West, including Israel, ramps up, more and more war against these different Islamic nations, especially against Iran. They're gonna remember their wild nations, their wild nature, okay, and wage war back against the West. All right, and we see that happening right now with Iran firing hundreds of missiles in retaliation against the attack from Israel. You see, the attack on their nuclear facilities and whatnot. It says, and if they shall turn themselves, conspiring together in great power to persecute them. See that? So these different Islamic nations, Iran included, okay, are going to, eventually conspire together to wage war against the West and wage war against the state of Israel. You see? And it's all going to lead to, World War III. All right? Which, the scripture speaks about, the least of the flock. All right, let's type that in. Okay. Well, you know what? Let's read both of these verses. Okay. It says Jeremiah 49 verse 20. Therefore hear the counsel of the Lord Yahweh that he hath taken against Edom and his purposes, that he hath purpose against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitations desolate with them. Okay, so this is prophecy against Esau, Edom, by the Lord. Okay, and then let's read the next verse it has listed, Jeremiah 50 verse 45. It says, therefore hear ye the counsel of the Lord Yahweh, that he hath purpose against Babylon. See that? So in Jeremiah 49 and 20, okay, it's speaking about the counsel of the Lord that hath had, purpose against Edom. And then in the very next chapter, Jeremiah 50 verse 45, it speaks about the counsel of the Lord that's taken against Babylon, showing you what? That the judgment upon Esau, Edom, is synonymous with the judgment that the Lord is getting ready to bring upon Babylon the Great, America. All right, and likewise vice versa. The judgment tied to Esau, Edom is tied to the judgment that the Lord is getting ready to bring upon Babylon the Great, America. Because what? Esau, Edom is who rules over Babylon the Great, America. Okay, the virgin daughter of Babylon, as it speaks of in Isaiah 47. You see, it says, Jeremiah 50 verse 45, therefore hear ye the counsel of the Lord Yahweh, that he hath taken against Babylon, and his purposes, that he hath purpose against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Okay, so pretty much Jeremiah 49 verse 20 and Jeremiah 50 verse 45 is all speaking of the same thing. Okay, the counsel of the Lord that he's purposed against Esau, Edom, and against Babylon the Great. Okay, which is all tied together. Because Esau, Edom is who rules over Babylon the Great in these end times. And as it went into, the least of the flock shall draw them out. Okay, and as our apostles and elders always go into it, the least of the flock is referring to the current state of Israel, those small hats. All right, because it's going to be those small hats that's going to pop off, the domino effect of World War III. Waging war against Iran, and Iran attacking them back, and things are going to get so heated between Israel and Iran that Israel is going to call America, Babylon the Great, to step in to help them against Iran. And then, that's going to lead to what? To Russia having to step in to defend Iran against America and Israel. You see? But it's all going to start with what? As we see going on in the news right now. Israel attacking Iran. Okay? The least of the flock. And as our apostles and elders always go into it, this word least, okay, the least of the flock, Strong's H6810, Tazayar, it says little, insignificant, young. Okay, then it goes into insignificant, young, younger, youngest. And now when you go into the history of the current state of Israel, they were, all right, although the current state of Israel is not officially a part of this beast system per se, America, NATO, and the EU, but however, in 1948, right after World War II, okay, those small hats, were put into the state of Israel, or the land of Israel, shall I say, at that time, okay, to eventually go on and form a state known as the current state of Israel through the Balfour Declaration. Okay, and it was the British who primarily set them up in that land, right after World War II, which Great Britain is a part of this beast system. So basically, unofficially, the current state of Israel, those small hats, all right, Amalek, they're the youngest, nation or state to be formed, out of this beast system, and that's why they're known as the least of the flock. Okay, the youngest, the younger, and it also goes into insignificant. You see? Then it says, yeah, so the least of the flock, the current state of Israel, would be the main, the main country, the main, government structure. All right, as I read again, Jeremiah 50 verse 45. Therefore hear ye the counsel of the Lord Yahweh, that he had taken against Babylon, America, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the land of the Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Okay, because it's going to be the state of Israel that's going to draw America, Babylon the Great. Okay, and along with the rest of these heathen nations out into war in the Middle East. Okay, World War III. And then it goes on to say, surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Yeah, because the moves that Israel is making out there in the Middle East right now, especially against Iran, is all going to lead to America being destroyed. Because it's all going to lead to what? World War III popping off. Russia and China, North Korea, Iran, and different other nations that's going to be gathered with Russia and China, all waging war against America, waging war against the West. And as well, we even know, according to prophecy, according to Revelation 17, that the Lord is even going to put the spirit on America's allies, his European allies, to be against this place, okay, and help aid in the destruction of this place, all right, and as well the destruction of the current state of Israel. The least of the flock is what's going to draw all of this destruction out. You see. And so let's get Ezekiel 38. All right, Ezekiel 38. Going into prophecy about Gog and Magog. Okay, which represents Russia in these outer days. All right, Ezekiel 38, and I'm gonna start at verse 3. It says, and say, thus saith the Lord power Yahweh, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Okay, and Gog and Magog in this chapter, represents Russia. Okay, because when you go to Google and you look up an ancient map of where Gog and Magog was in ancient times, it was basically located in southern Russia. Okay, southern Russia. So in this chapter, when it's speaking about Gog and Magog, because when you go to Genesis 10, Gog and Magog, those were the names of particular sons of Japheth. But however, in this chapter, this chapter is not speaking about the physical descendants of Japheth. Okay, it's only speaking about the people that will be living in these Japhetic lands in these outer days. Which are the Russians, which are Edomites. Okay, so when it's speaking about Gog and Magog in this chapter, is only speaking about the land. Okay, not the descendants of Japheth, but speaking about the land. Okay, the inhabitants of the land of Gog and Magog in these latter days, which is, the Russians, which are Edomites. Okay, so it says, Ezekiel 38 verse 3, and say, thus said the Lord power Yahweh, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Verse 4, and I will turn thee back and put hooks in thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Basically meaning what? That in these outer days, the Lord would, raise up the Russian army. Okay, raise them up out of that weakened, Cold War era spirit. Pretty much, from the year 1991. Okay, that was pretty much the end of the Soviet Union. All right, but then over these past 10, 15 plus years or so, we've been seeing the Lord raising the Russian military back up in that that pre 1991 spirit, that Cold War spirit. Okay, that post World War II spirit. Okay, and the Lord has put hooks in their jaws, to raise up their their military strength, their nuclear arsenal. Okay, their nuclear missiles. All right, all for the purpose of what? Waging war against America. It says, verse 5 says Persia, okay, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Okay, and when you go into Persia, Persia is referring to Iran. Okay, literally, when you go into the history, Iran, okay, was officially known as Persia up until I believe the 1930s, where they officially changed their name from Persia to Iran. Okay, so Persia here in this chapter is referring to Iran. So the first and foremost country that will be allied with Russia, according to Ezekiel 38, will be Persia / Iran. You see, and we clearly been seeing relations between Iran and Russia increasing more and more over these past 10 to 15 years or so. Okay, and then it says Ethiopia, particular African nations linking up with Russia. All right, we've been seeing that happening over recent years. All right, and it says Libya. Okay, now why would Libya also be allied with Russia in these latter days? Because when you go into Libya over the past 15 or so years, remember when NATO took out Gaddafi? Okay, which when you go into Gaddafi, he was the former Libyan president who he basically wanted to have their currency backed by gold. Okay, do away with the particular constraints that NATO and the West put upon Libya and their economy, and he wanted to liberate the Libyan economy and have their currency backed by gold, and in turn, NATO and the West ended up taking them out. And so, why would Libya be joined with Russia in these latter days? To basically get revenge against the West for what they did to their former leader Gaddafi. You see, which as well, Libya is also another Islamic country over there in the east. You see, and they're gonna go back to their nature. You see, and so and then it continues to say in verse 6, Gomar and all his bands, and the house of Togomar of the north quarters, which Togomar is symbolic of Turkey. Okay, and Turkey, we've been seeing over these past few years, especially since October 2023. Okay, with when Israel was the current state of Israel got attacked by the Hamas and things like that. Hey, we've been seeing we've been seeing Turkey looking at America with the side eye over these past couple of years because of what's going on in Israel, in Gaza and things like that. So what? Turkey is going to turn cold against NATO and side with Russia. Okay, and we see that right here in prophecy. It says again, Ezekiel 38:6, Gomar and all his bands, the house of Togomar of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. See that? So all these nations that are just listed and more are going to be linked up with Russia in these latter days. Okay, all to to wage war against the West, wage war against Babylon and Great America, and as well wage war against the current state of Israel. All right. And then it says, verse 7, be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. So Russia will be a guard unto these nations that is just listed in these latter days: Persia / Iran, Ethiopia, and particular African nations, Libya, okay, Turkey. All right, because what? These would be a host of nations that the Lord would raise up in these latter days to wage war against Babylon and Great America, and wage war against the current state of Israel, and bring destruction upon those lands. You see, in World War III, and also we can read about prophecy of Gog and Magog. All right, in Revelation the 20th chapter. Okay, this is Revelation chapter 20, and as you can see right above it, it makes reference to Ezekiel 38 that we just read. This is Revelation chapter 20 and starting at verse 7. It says, "And when the 1,000 years are expired," okay, the so-called Dark Ages, where Jake was basically ruling over Europe and Russia for a period of 1,000 years. Okay, where you had so-called black images, created all across Europe and Russia during the so-called Dark Ages or medieval ages, right? Pretty much from the 4th century A.D. up until the 1400s. Okay, when Esau Edom came out of the Caucasus Mountains and started taking over parts of Europe and Russia from Jake. Okay, which is known as the so-called Renaissance period, which means rebirth. All right, the rebirth of what? The rebirth of ancient Greco-Roman philosophies and beliefs and values throughout the earth. Pretty much the rebirth of Edomite supremacy in the earth. Okay, during the 1400s up until now. It says again, Revelation 20 verse 7, "And when the 1,000 years are expired," all right, the so-called Dark Ages, it says Satan shall be loose out of his prison. Satan, all right, it's not referring to the actual spiritual demon Satan being loose out of a prison. Okay, it's referring to Esau Edom, the Satan-like man. All right, the one who would do the working of Satan, pursuant to 2 Thessalonians 2. Okay, it's referring to Esau Edom being loosed out of the Caucasus Mountains. Okay, being loose out of the Caucasus Mountains, all right, at the beginning of the so-called Renaissance period, to do what? To take over Europe from Jake, take over Russia from Jake, setting themselves up as the true leaders of Europe during the so-called Dark Ages and whatnot. Whitewashing and iconoclasm. Okay. And it says, verse 8, in all of that, the Renaissance and all the things that took place during the Renaissance period would all lead up to America, Babylon the Great, along with NATO and the EU, as we see today. Okay, because America, along with NATO and the EU, is pretty much the revival of the ancient Western Roman system. You see, the revival of ancient Rome. And that's pretty much what the Renaissance period was all about. Reviving the ancient Greco-Roman system into the earth again. And that's what America, NATO, and EU has been all about. Okay? And so it says, verse 8, Revelation 20, verse 8, "And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth." All right, deceiving the nations through what? Colonization, Catholicism, Judeo-Christianity, so-called white Jesus, all right, pseudoscience, technology, false education, IQ scores, and all this other madness that Esau puts out. Okay, is his mainstream news propaganda, economic falsehood and things like that. Okay, that's all Esau has been done throughout the 4 corners of the earth since the Renaissance period up until now, when he was loose out of his prison. Do nothing but rape, robbery, murder, deceive, lie, cheat, and steal. Okay, and now he's getting ready to take his deception to a whole another level with AI and deep fakes and the charagma, and it says, Revelation 20 verse 8, "And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog." Okay, we just read about Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38. It says to gather them together to battle. All right, so all of Esau's deception and wickedness that he's done through this beast system would all lead to, all right, Gog and Magog, Russia, okay, and the nations allied with them to be gathered together in battle against the West, against America. You see? And it says the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. You see that? Verse 9. "And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city." All right, what is the beloved city? Babylon the Great. Okay, beloved according to this world. All right, It says, and fire came down from Yahweh out of heaven. All right, the fire coming down representing what? The nuclear missiles, nuclear warheads, hypersonic missiles. You see that? And that's what it's all leading to. Okay, and it's all starting with the least of the flock drawing out all these nations to lead to the destruction of Babylon the Great America, as well as the land of Israel being desolate. Okay, for it to be rebuilt back up in the kingdom, with us being returned to that land. It says, and fire came down from Yahweh out of heaven and devoured them. Okay, and the devil that deceived them, right, Esau, Edom, was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. The lake of fire representing what? The destruction of America, Babylon the Great. Okay, the lake of fire is not talking about no place underneath the ground where, when you die, if you've been doing wickedness on the earth all your life, okay, you're going to be tortured by the spiritual demon Satan in a pool of fire, okay, forever and ever and ever. No, all right. As you have, certain Israelites as of recently, coming back up with that false doctrine all over again. That whole lake of fire deception and hell and all this other madness. Okay, no, the lake of fire and brimstone is just simply talking about the destruction of Babylon the Great America. Okay, the nuclear destruction of Babylon the Great America. That is what the lake of fire is. All right, not some place underneath the ground called hell. All right, it says, and the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, destruction of America, where the beast and the false prophet are. Okay, the beast in this particular prophecy is referring to America. Okay, the whore that rideth upon the beast, pursuant to Revelation 17. All right, and the false prophet referring to the Catholic Church. Okay, because when you go into you pretty much have three aspects of this beast system. You have the Pentagon, which represents the military power of this beast system, and then you have the Vatican, which represents the spiritual aspect of this beast system, which the Vatican is where? Over there in Italy, okay, where all of this started in the first place. Italy, Rome, right? America is the revival of ancient Rome, okay, and the Vatican has helped to to fulfill that process of America reviving ancient Rome through the Catholic Church, okay, and then you also have the London, England, okay, which represents the pretty much the financial capital of this beast system, America, NATO, and EU, okay, and so it says again, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever, which is symbolic of a long period of time, okay, because when America gets destroyed, and it's on fire via the nuclear missiles, and the smoke of this place goes up, okay, it's going to be smoking and burning for a very long period of time, not literally forever and ever and ever, okay, but the legacy and the memory of this place being destroyed is going to last forever, just like the legacy and the memory of ancient Sodom and Gomorrah is still burning today, not physically but mentally and spiritually, okay. Well, that's going to be likened to the destruction of America, Babylon the Great. It's going to be destroyed and made desolate by way of fire. But the legacy and the memorial of destruction of this place is going to last forever, because it's going to be made an example of a country that was in full-blown rebellion against Yahweh Shema Shah and what the Lord did to this place. You see, but with all these things that's been happening, just in this past week alone, it's all, again, letting us, the hopeful elect, know what? That prophecy is no longer tarrying, but now is speaking. Okay, we at the end. World War III is popping off. Tensions between Israel and Iran is popping off. Okay, you got all these riots and protests happening across the country, uproars of the people, economic collapse. Esau's ramping up with this, mass surveillance and pseudoscience at an all-time high. All right, the Karagama is pretty much here, via the Neuralink and things like that. Now it's just a matter of, one, false, flag event, one black swan event to justify Esau shutting everything down to, to implement the Charagma, okay, under the guise of peace and safety. And then, what? Once the Charagma is implemented, then soon after that, what? The missiles are going to be shot off. Hey, we're almost at that point, Akim. So with all these things happening around the world, okay, as it speaks of in Romans 13, I'm going to end it off on there. This is Romans chapter 13, verse 11. It says, "And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. For now, now is our salvation nearer than when we believe." And our salvation is drawing nearer and nearer, more and more each day, Akim. So though these prophecies are tarrying, hey, now we're at a time where it's no longer tarrying. It's speaking now. It's happening now. Okay? And now, all we pretty much have to do at this point, is just continue, preaching the word, pretty much just sit back and let prophecy unfold. Let this world collapse right before our eyes, and let Babylon the Great collapse right before our eyes, for us to get the victory, and get delivered the hell up out of this place, So, hey, so with that, I'm pretty much ended off right there. Lord willing, this video is edifying. You sincere Akim and Nakwakim out there that's of the hopeful elect, just continue being steadfast in the faith, constantly praying and watching, be vigilant, be circumspect, okay? Continue, offering of the right sacrifice of this grace period, and hey, we at the end. The day of our salvation is drawing nearer and nearer, more than we believe. Okay? Just continue to endure to the end. All right, so that, hey, we can receive the victory that's written, So with that, Lord willing, this video is edifying. And until next time, shalom.